The federal tactical team arrived at the Mill Haven Police Department at 11:47 p.m. There were 12 of them. They came in 4 black SUVs that pulled into the station parking lot with the particular quiet certainty of vehicles, driven by people who have already made every decision that matters and are simply executing the last steps. They wore no identifying insignia. They carried credentials that superseded every jurisdictional authority the station's watch commander had ever encountered. The last vehicle carried a man who had not been in a local police station in 30 years. He was 61 years old, 4 stars, the kind of man whose posture communicated rank before any other signal arrived. He came through the front door of the Mill Haven Police Department with his hands loose at his sides and his face set in the expression of a man who has been given information that he finds personally and professionally unacceptable and has arrived to correct it. The watch commander, a 19-year department veteran named Raines who had handled 4 officer-involved shootings and 2 federal investigations and considered himself difficult to rattle, looked at the general and the team behind him and felt something leave his body that he would later describe to his wife as all of the confidence he had ever had about anything. "Where is he?" the general said. It was not a question. Hit that like button. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from tonight. Xavier Beaumont had bought the car 18 months ago, on a Tuesday in April, at a dealership in Los Angeles that sold vehicles at price points that caused most people to treat the showroom like a museum rather than a place of transaction. He had walked in wearing a white t-shirt and dark jeans and boots that had been resold twice and that a very perceptive person might have recognized as field boots with the identifying hardware removed. He had sat with the sales consultant for 20 minutes and asked 12 specific questions, all of which concerned mechanical reliability and interior dimensions rather than performance or aesthetics. He had paid in a manner that was entirely legitimate and that the dealership's financing department, which was accustomed to unusual financial arrangements from unusual clients, processed without comment. He had driven it off the lot and pulled over twice on the highway home. Once to look at the exterior in the afternoon sun, and once to sit in the passenger seat. The passenger seat was why he had bought it. The car was why, but the seat was why. His mother had died 14 years ago in a hospital in Baton Rouge of a cancer that had been diagnosed too late and treated too little because the insurance she carried through her job at a school cafeteria did not cover the specialists who might have caught it earlier. She had worked that job for 22 years. She had put Xavier and his sister through school on that salary, supplemented by whatever else could be managed, and she had done it without complaint and without self-pity, and with a quality of daily consistency that Xavier had spent most of his adult life trying to understand the architecture of. In the last year of her life, when she could still travel, she had said once, without elaboration, during a Sunday dinner, that she had always wanted to ride in a Rolls-Royce. She had seen one in a magazine when she was young, and it had seemed to her like the most specific and elegant expression of the idea that beautiful things could exist for their own sake, without apology. She had not ridden in one. She had died in November in the hospital room with the window that faced the parking structure, and Xavier had been there and had been holding her hand and had said nothing because there was nothing adequate to say. He had promised himself then that he would buy the car someday, not for himself, for her. For the version of herself that had looked at a photograph in a magazine and allowed herself to want something beautiful. He kept the passenger seat empty. He had not told anyone why. He did not need to explain it to anyone. It was a private thing, conducted in private terms, and that was exactly right. Xavier was 38 years old. He had grown up in Baton Rouge, the son of a woman who worked in a school cafeteria, and a man who had left when Xavier was 7, and whose absence had structured his childhood in ways that had taken him 20 years to fully map. He had been recruited into the Army at 19 by a recruiter who saw something in him that Xavier hadn't yet seen in himself. A quality of attentiveness, a natural stillness, a capacity for operating in high-stress environments without the expenditure of energy that most people couldn't contain. He had served 6 years in conventional infantry, then 2 in special operations support, then, after a process that he was still legally prohibited from describing in most contexts, another 12 in a compartmented program that operated outside the conventional military structure and that the Central Intelligence Agency had theoretical oversight of, but which functioned in practice as something closer to a law unto itself. He had done things in those 12 years that he thought about carefully. He had done them in service of outcomes that he believed, on balance, had been the right outcomes, while understanding that "on balance" was a phrase that covered a significant amount of weight. He had operated in 17 countries. He had worked alone as often as he had worked in teams. He had, in the specific vocabulary of his former profession, neutralized threats that the official record would describe in language so neutral as to be nearly abstract. He had retired at 36 because 12 years was enough, and because something in him had shifted, not toward guilt or doubt, but toward a clarity about what he was and was not willing to continue doing. He had been honest with his debriefers about the shift. They had been honest with him about the fact that it was common, that it was respected, that the transition support available to personnel of his classification was considerable and genuine. He now ran a private security consulting firm with 4 employees, all of whom were former special operations or intelligence personnel, all of whom worked with the same methodical precision and minimal profile that Xavier had always operated in. The firm was profitable without being large, respected without being known, and structured in a way that allowed Xavier to take cases that interested him rather than cases that merely paid. He was driving through Millhaven on a Thursday evening in October, passing through on the way to a client meeting the following morning 60 miles north, when the lights appeared in his rearview mirror. He knew, in the first 30 seconds of the stop, what was happening. He had enough operational experience to distinguish between a routine traffic stop and a stop with a different structure, where the officer approaches, how quickly, how many times they look at the car versus the driver, whether the hand rests near the weapon before there is any information to justify it. He recognized the structure of what Officer Carter was doing within the first 30 seconds because he had spent 12 years learning to read the structure of things before their explicit content arrived. He kept his hands on the wheel at 10 and 2. He had his license, registration, and insurance in a specific pocket of the center console where he kept them always, where they could be produced without reaching in ways that produced different outcomes. He breathed slowly. He waited. Carter was 32 years old, 9 years on the Millhaven force, with a disciplinary file that the department's Internal Affairs Division had been managing rather than resolving for 6 of those 9 years. He had a specific relationship with certain intersections of race and apparent affluence that had cost the department money twice in civil settlements that were not classified as admissions of wrongdoing, which was how those things were always classified. He had not been fired because he had the union and a captain who played golf with his uncle, which was the specific and ordinary machinery through which those situations persisted. He walked to the driver's side window with his hand not quite at his weapon, close enough to establish the option, far enough to claim it was incidental. He looked at Xavier. He looked at the car. He looked at Xavier again. "License and registration," he said without preamble, without the standard greeting. Xavier produced them from the center console, slowly, in the deliberate manner of a man who has made every movement legible. Carter took them. He looked at the name. He looked at the car. He looked back at the name. "This your vehicle?" Carter said. "Yes," Xavier said. "This is an $800,000 vehicle," Carter said. "Yes," Xavier said. Carter looked at the white t-shirt, the dark jeans, the rieseled boots. He looked at the car. He ran the calculation that he ran, which was the calculation of a man whose experience of the world had taught him a set of conditional probabilities that were not accurate and that he had never examined. He reached his conclusion in approximately 4 seconds. "Step out of the vehicle," Carter said. Xavier stepped out. He was 6 feet 190 pounds, and he stood beside the Rolls-Royce with his hands visible at his sides, with the practiced stillness of a man who had been in situations with considerably higher stakes than this one and had learned that stillness, sustained with complete consistency, was the most information-preserving response available. Carter called for backup. While he waited, he told Xavier that the vehicle had been reported stolen, which it had not, which Carter knew it had not, because he had run the plates, and the plates were clean. He told Xavier to put his hands behind his back. Xavier put his hands behind his back. He did not say anything. He did not protest. He did not invoke his rights, or his record, or the specific file that would have produced a very different interaction had he chosen to produce it. He made a calculation that was not passive and was not compliance in the sense of acceptance. It was the operational decision of a man who understood that the recording that a bystander's phone was making from the sidewalk across the street was more valuable than anything he could say, and that saying anything would give Carter something to work with that the silence didn't. He stayed silent. Carter put him in handcuffs. What happened next happened in front of the bystander's phone, and in front of a second phone that a couple walking their dog had produced when they saw the first-person recording, and in front of a third phone belonging to a woman who had come to her front window when she heard the raised voices. Xavier was put on the ground. The ground was concrete. He did not resist. Carter's backup arrived. 2 more officers named Draper and Sills, who would later claim in statements that the federal investigators would spend less than 20 minutes dismantling, that they had arrived after the relevant events. Carter searched the vehicle. He searched it the way certain people search things when they have already decided what they are looking for and are frustrated by not finding it. Not methodically, not with the controlled precision of legitimate law enforcement procedure, but with the escalating energy of a man whose narrative is not cooperating with the available evidence. He pulled the custom upholstery from the rear seats. He opened the center console and emptied it onto the floor of the car. He used a knife, his own from a sheath on his belt, to open the seat cushions along the seam, looking for compartments that were not there. Xavier, on the concrete beside the patrol car, watched this through the window with an expression that did not change. The passenger seat was cut, the leather was expensive, and the cut went deep. And something in Xavier's chest registered it the way things register when a private meaning meets a public violation, but his face did not change, and his breathing did not change, and the quality of his stillness on the concrete did not change. Carter, finding nothing, called it in as a possible stolen vehicle pending verification and had Xavier transported to the Millhaven Police Department holding cells. The car was left at the curb. Before leaving, Carter's patrol car, pulling out of the space, made contact with the front quarter panel of the Rolls-Royce at a speed and angle that were not consistent with an accident. 3 phones recorded everything. Xavier sat in the holding cell on a wooden bench with his hands on his knees and his back straight and his eyes on the middle distance. He was not performing composure. He was not suppressing anything, or managing anything, or deploying the particular strain of false calm that people deploy when they are frightened and trying not to show it. He was simply present in the room, with the quality of attention that he had developed over 12 years of being in places where agitation cost things that could not be recovered. He had made 2 decisions in the first 3 minutes. The first was that he would not invoke his classification or his history or any information that would have changed the temperature of the situation immediately, because the situation needed to remain exactly what it was. A documented, clean, unambiguous record of what Carter had done, and introducing any complication would create ambiguity where ambiguity served Carter rather than the record. The second was that he would call one number when permitted access to a phone, and that call would set in motion a sequence he did not need to choreograph because the people on the other end had been choreographing things like this for decades. He thought about the seat, not obsessively, not with the quality of a man who cannot get past a thing. He thought about it the way he had learned to think about hard things, with direct attention for a specific duration, and then with the deliberate decision to set it aside and return to the task. The leather could be replaced. He had the specifications in a file on his phone, the weight and color and stitch pattern, the precise measurements of the cushion, the thread count of the backing fabric, everything he had specified when the car was built because the seat mattered, and mattering meant being precise. He would call the upholstery workshop when he was out, and they would fix it, and the seat would be what it had always been. She was not in the leather. She was in the fact of it. The fact was intact. He breathed slowly. He looked at the middle distance. He waited with the patience of a man who has spent years in places where waiting was the work. The holding cell was not uncomfortable in any way he had not experienced before in less hospitable contexts. The bench was hard, but he had slept on harder surfaces in less controlled environments. The fluorescent light had a minor flicker, but he had operated in far more visually disorienting conditions. The other man in the cell, a young man, 20s, who had come in an hour before Xavier on a charge he had not specified, had glanced at Xavier twice and then looked away and kept to himself, which Xavier appreciated and acknowledged with a single brief nod. He was permitted access to a phone at 9:47. He made the call. It lasted 45 seconds. He said 6 sentences. He returned to the bench. He sat. He was still sitting, back straight, hands on knees, eyes on the middle distance, entirely occupied with the interior work of a man who has learned to make time pass by filling it with things that do not require external input, when the front of the Millhaven Police Department changed its nature entirely at 11:47 p.m. The watch commander, Rains, had been in his office processing the end-of-shift paperwork when the first SUV pulled in. He had gone to the window when he heard the vehicles, the way you go to the window when a sound is unexpected, and your instincts have been developed enough by experience to recognize the unexpected before your mind has fully processed what it is. He had watched the second and third and fourth SUVs. He had watched 12 people exit those vehicles with the specific economy of movement that people who have conducted many operations in many environments carry as a permanent characteristic. Not aggressive, not demonstrative, simply fully present and fully prepared. He had gone to the front of the station. Rains had been in law enforcement for 19 years. He had processed 4 officer-involved shootings, 2 federal investigations, 1 hostage situation, and the particular ongoing management of a department that operated in a county with sufficient wealth to generate significant property crime and sufficient political complexity to make the management of that crime a perpetual negotiation. He was not easily rattled. He had built his career on the specific quality of not being easily rattled. He stood at the front of his station and watched the general come through the door and felt something exit his body that he later described to his wife, inadequately, as every assumption I've ever had about how bad a night can get. The general came through the door and looked at Rains and said, "Where is he?" And the tone of it was not a request, and not even precisely a demand. It was the tone of a man stating the next thing in a sequence he has already completed in his mind and is simply executing. "Holding," Rains said. "Cell 3. I need your incident report, your booking records, and the name of the officer who conducted the stop," the general said. Rains had all 3 ready within 90 seconds. He provided them with the specific cooperation of a man who has understood rapidly and completely that his choices are to cooperate fully and immediately or to not cooperate, and that the second option leads somewhere he does not want to go. The general looked at the incident report. He looked at Carter's name. He looked at Rains with the expression of a man who has confirmed something he was already certain of and is now in the execution phase. "Get him in here," the general said. The general turned to one of the men behind him, a federal agent whose identification, when Rains looked at it, had a classification designator that Rains had seen once before, during a terrorism investigation that had involved a 3-agency task force and that the FBI had eventually taken over entirely. The agent went through the corridor toward the holding cells. The general looked at Rains. "I need your incident report, your booking records, and the name of the officer who conducted the stop," the general said. Rains provided all 3. He provided them with the specific cooperation of a man who has understood that his choices are to cooperate fully and immediately or to not cooperate, and that the second option leads somewhere he does not want to go. The general looked at the name on the incident report. "Where is Carter now?" he said. "Off duty, sir. End of his shift was." "Get him in here." Raines got him in. Carter arrived at the station at 12:31, having been reached by phone by Raines and told that there was a federal matter that required his presence, which was phrased in a way that conveyed urgency without conveying the specific nature of what was waiting for him. He walked through the front door of the station and stopped. The general was sitting in one of the waiting area chairs, not at a desk, not behind any authority structure, just sitting in the chair, which was itself a kind of statement. The federal agents were positioned around the room in a configuration that was not aggressive and was also not optional. Two of them were holding equipment cases that Carter recognized as the kind used for evidence collection. Xavier was standing near the door to the corridor, having been released from the holding cell 14 minutes prior. He was wearing the same white t-shirt and dark jeans and resoled boots. He had a small abrasion on his left cheekbone from the concrete. He was standing with his hands loose at his sides and his back straight and looking at Carter with the expression he had maintained throughout, present, patient, not performing anything. Carter looked at Xavier. He looked at the general. He looked at the federal agents. He conducted his own calculation, which took somewhat longer than 4 seconds, and arrived at a destination he had not previously considered possible. "Officer Carter," the general said. He did not stand. He looked at Carter from the chair with the specific quality of attention of a man who is fully in possession of information about another person and is deciding how to present it. "In the past 4 hours, you conducted an unlawful traffic stop of a civilian vehicle with no probable cause. You used excessive force in the execution of that stop. You conducted an illegal search of a civilian vehicle without consent or warrant. You destroyed property valued at approximately $800,000. You filed an incident report containing multiple material falsehoods." He paused. Not for effect, for the next sentence to arrive in the right order. "The individual you detained is a protected federal asset operating under a classified national security designation. What you did tonight is not a civil matter. It is a federal matter. Specifically, it is a federal matter involving obstruction, destruction of protected federal assets, and filing false federal documents." Carter's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "The 3 recordings that are currently circulating online have been preserved as federal evidence," the general said. "Your body cam footage, which your report claims was non-functional, has been recovered from the department's server by our technical team. It was functional." He looked at Carter for a long moment. "There are 2 federal agents here who are going to read you your rights and place you under arrest. I'd suggest you don't say anything until you've spoken with an attorney." Carter said something anyway. It was not coherent. It was the specific kind of speech that emerges when a man has spent his career operating inside a set of structures that he believed were permanent and discovers in a single evening that they were conditional. The federal agents read him his rights. They placed him in handcuffs, the same model, Raines noticed, that Carter had used on Xavier 4 hours before. Carter was walked out through the front door of the Millhaven Police Department in handcuffs, past the parking lot where the federal SUVs sat, into a vehicle that was not a Millhaven patrol car, and that drove away without hurry. Xavier and the general stood in the waiting area after the agents had gone. The general looked at the abrasion on Xavier's cheekbone. He looked at it with the expression of a man who has seen similar marks in other contexts and for whom the translation between contexts was not abstract. "You should have called sooner," the general said. "The recording needed to be complete," Xavier said. The general looked at him. "You made a tactical decision." "Yes, sir. In a holding cell." "The cell was the right place to make it from," Xavier said. "Calling earlier would have introduced a variable. The record was cleaner this way." The general was quiet for a moment. In 34 years, he had encountered approximately 40 people who operated the way Xavier operated, with the specific quality of situational processing that treated adversity as information rather than as stimulus. He had encountered approximately 6 of them who maintained that quality in circumstances where the adversity was directed at themselves personally. "The car," the general said. Xavier said nothing for a moment. It can be repaired or replaced. Simply, without performance. It's a car. Your mother's seat, the general said. Xavier looked at the floor for 1 second, then back up. It can be reupholstered, same leather, same stitching. I have the specifications. A pause. She's not in the seat, sir. She's in the fact of the seat. That's not something that can be damaged. The general was quiet. Rains came to the waiting area. His voice had a quality it had not had 3 hours ago. Not apologetic exactly, but the voice of a man who has revised his understanding of what was in his station. Mr. Beaumont, your vehicle has been moved to our impound lot for security. We can arrange transport. I'll arrange my own, Xavier said. Thank you. He turned to the general. I'll be in touch about the Langley consultation. Next week should work. Next week, the general said. They shook hands. Two men who operate in adjacent worlds and have long since stopped needing to state what they understand about each other. Xavier walked out into the October night. He sat on the curb beside the impound lot fence and called his sister in Baton Rouge. She picked up on the second ring because she always picked up quickly when she saw his number at unusual hours, a habit formed over 20 years of not knowing where he was or what the unusual hour might contain. You okay? She said. She always said that first. I'm fine, he said. I just wanted to talk for a minute. She knew from the specific quality of the just that the minute was more than a minute and that she should not ask directly what had happened. She had learned this about him over many years, that the way into the things he carried was through the side door, never the front, and that the side door opened when you did not push on it. She did not push. I was thinking about Mama today, he said. Tell me, she said. He told her about the seat, about the leather, about the specifications file on his phone, the weight and color and stitch pattern, the precise measurements of the cushion, the thread count of the backing, the exact color of the stitching, which was not white, but something more precisely described as warm ivory, which his mother would have distinguished and which he had therefore been precise about. He told her about driving it home from the dealership and pulling over on the highway twice, once to look at it in the afternoon light and once to sit in the passenger seat. He had not told anyone about that second stop. He had not told anyone about sitting in the passenger seat on the highway and what that had felt like, which was not grief and not joy exactly, but something containing both. Primarily, the feeling of a promise being kept to someone who could no longer verify that it was being kept, which was the most important kind. She was quiet for a long time after he finished. She would have loved it, his sister said finally. I know, Xavier said. She also would have said you paid too much. She absolutely would have, Xavier said. His sister laughed. The specific laugh of a woman who has been carrying grief for 14 years and has found a way to hold it lightly enough that laughter can coexist with it. Xavier laughed too, briefly, in the dark outside the Millhaven impound lot, and it was genuine in the way laughter is genuine when it arrives unexpectedly in a difficult context. They talked for an hour. About their mother, about his sister's daughter who was 12 and obsessed with marine science, about the house in Baton Rouge that still had the kitchen their mother had painted 3 times because the color mattered and the first 2 hadn't been right, which made Xavier smile because he had repainted his own kitchen twice for the same reason and had never made the connection until that moment. When he ended the call, he sat on the curb for a few more minutes in the quiet. The October air was cold and clean and moved slightly from the west. In the impound lot, he could see the front quarter panel damage visible even in the lot's overhead light. He looked at it directly for the time needed, and then with the deliberate shift of attention that was not avoidance, but choice. He opened the specifications file on his phone. He sent it to the upholstery workshop in Los Angeles with a message, damaged, same spec as original, let me know timeline. He put his phone in his pocket and stood up. The car from the general's office arrived 2 minutes later to take him to his hotel. Carter's suspension without pay was announced 48 hours after his arrest. His union representation lasted 6 days before his union declined further involvement. which was unusual and which the union's statement described as a decision based on the specific circumstances of the case, which was the most diplomatic available language for the situation. Draper and Sills, the backup officers, were placed on administrative review pending the outcome of the federal investigation. The Mill Haven Police Department issued a statement that used the phrase, "does not reflect our values" 4 times in 11 sentences, which was a high ratio. The federal case was not resolved quickly because federal cases are not designed to be resolved quickly, and because the specific charges involved created a jurisdictional complexity that the U.S. Attorney's Office was navigating with the particular care that attaches to cases that are simultaneously straightforward and politically significant. The recordings continued to circulate online. The comment sections were the specific kind of comment sections that attach to videos of this nature. A mixture of rage and recognition, and the occasional voice saying something simple and true about what it meant to watch a man be completely, absolutely still while something unjust was done to him, and to know, without being told, that the stillness was not defeat. Xavier did not watch the videos. He was aware of their existence and their circulation, and he had been advised of their legal preservation as evidence, and he considered all of that appropriately and then set it aside. He had work to do. He had a client meeting the following morning 60 miles north. He was driven there in a car that was not a Rolls-Royce, and he sat in the passenger seat of that car during the drive, and he thought about what he would say in the meeting, which was a complex security assessment for a financial institution with specific vulnerabilities he had been studying for 2 weeks. He thought about his mother, briefly, in the way he thought about her most days. Not with grief exactly, which had receded over 14 years into something more integrated and less acute, but with the specific ongoing presence of someone who is gone and who remains anyway, in the way that people remain when you have decided to carry them forward rather than leave them behind. She would have loved the car. She would have sat in that passenger seat and looked out at whatever was going by with the quality of a woman who had spent 22 years in a school cafeteria and had always known, somewhere underneath it, that beautiful things could exist for their own sake. He was going to get the seat reupholstered, same leather, same specifications, same empty seat. She was still in it. That had never required the leather to be intact. It just required him to keep showing up. He always showed up. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you're here for stories about people who carry the most without saying a word. Leave a comment below. Have you ever watched someone stay completely still in the face of something unjust and understood that the stillness was the strongest thing in the room?